while these guys are still moving around, I thought I'd share some cool news with you. So as you give, really the truth is you're doing more than supporting, keeping lights on and doing things like that. We're really kind of participating in what God is doing here in St. Louis through Grace Union Church, but also around the world. We have probably, I think, 14 missionary families now that we help support and contribute to. But one church that we just adopted this last year was a church plant called Reach Church in North County. You guys remember that? And so Reach Church now, I just talked to their pastor the other day, Pastor Chris, and their average attendance is now 100 people. They were born on Easter. Yeah, the church was born on Easter. They've conducted 50 baptisms already, and they've, I think, had multiple people come accept Jesus and then get right up from the altars and go right into rehab. And so it's just an incredible church. God's doing great things. They had an outreach yesterday morning, breakfast with Santa, and they had over 500 people come through their church and kind of get acquainted with them. And so God is just doing incredible things. And so as you participate in giving, you're participating in great things that are happening here, but also you're participating in what God is doing all over our city and also all over our world. So thanks for your faithfulness in that. And so as we kind of jump into the message today, what it means that God is with us. What does it mean that this baby was born in a manger 2,000 years ago? What does all this really mean? And so I want to ask a question. Have you ever, in all honesty, just felt let down by the reality of your life or your situation? Like maybe you look at your kids and you think, man, these kids, they just have so much potential, but maybe they're just not living up to it. Or maybe you look at yourself and you feel like you have this great personal potential yourself that just isn't being realized. Or maybe you just thought, I really thought I'd be further in my career than I am by now. Or maybe you had really high hopes for what it would be like to be married and to have a family and all of that. And now that you have it, maybe it feels like something is still missing. Maybe you look at your family and you think, man, this could be so much better than it is. Or maybe on a broader scale, maybe you're a kind of person that looks at the world around you and you see the hurt, you see the injustice in the world, and you just know that so much more is possible. So maybe you've even at times in life expressed frustration that things are what they are. Maybe something inside of you aches for a reality that you know in your bones is possible, but you just don't see it yet. In Matthew chapter 1, verses 22 and 23, it says this about the birth of Jesus. It says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. You see, what this whole season is about is that 2,000 years ago, God himself came to be with us physically. He came to usher in a new reality. So what do we do with this sense that our world and our lives should be more, but we just don't see it yet? What do we do with that feeling? What do we do with that sense of uneasiness? So I want to tell this story that kind of walks us through this. Remember last week, if you were with us or if you weren't, I'll kind of help catch you up. But last week we talked about the vulnerability that Jesus and this family, Mary and Joseph, what they experienced at the birth of Jesus. We talked about the fact that he was born and that this crazy king named King Herod felt threatened by another king being born in his kingdom. And so he committed unimaginable crimes trying to snuff out the life of this baby. And so this young family had to run for their lives. They lived as refugees in the country of Egypt. They were completely vulnerable. They couldn't earn a living. They couldn't let people know who they were. They had to kind of stay to themselves, and everyone was a risk to them because anybody could be a spy sent by Herod. And they lived the first probably 2 or 3 years of Jesus' life in this constant, vulnerable state. And so we talked about that last week, and that brings us to where we are today. In Matthew chapter 2, we're going to start at verse 19. It says this: After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, and he said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up and he took the child and his mother, and he went to the land of Israel. Right? So imagine this moment for Joseph. Imagine after 2 or 3 years of being in hiding in a foreign land, after 2 or 3 years of constant vulnerability, 2 or 3 years of being constantly not at ease. And now at this moment, this announcement from the angel, it feels like everything is going to be amazing. Like everything is awesome. It was actually the first time that song was sung, right? Everything is awesome, right? And so, this is what they're thinking. Awesome, great, incredible. Back to Israel. And you got to remember, when the angel appeared to Mary, what he promised her. He said, listen, your son is going to be a great king. He's going to be the Messiah. They're going to call his name Great. He's going to save his people, right? He's going to sit on the throne of his ancestor David. So when they hear that they get to go back to Israel now, they're thinking, this is it. Our son is going to be the great king. Herod is dead. We're bringing the new king back with us, right? And so not only is everything going to be amazing and awesome, but Jesus, when he assumes his throne, they think he's going to return Israel to the days of King David and King Solomon, when Israel was like the height of human civilization. They were the most powerful and greatest thing around. So this is what really Mary and Joseph think is being announced to them by the angel. So not only do they expect that hiding and vulnerability are over now, but they expect that they're going back to experience the good life in Jerusalem. Their boy is going to grow up in the palace. They're going to be the king's parents, right? They're going to be like grand king, or I don't know how that works, but they're going to be the parents of the king. All their suffering, all their fear, all the danger is going to be worth it really, really soon. Remember what they left just before the attempt on Jesus' life. Remember what was happening. Choirs of angels came and sung songs about him. Has any of you ever had a choir of angels sing about you? This is just what happened. Imagine you enter the room and the angels are like, hallelujah, hallelujah, he's here, throw a party. That's what happened when he entered the room, in a sense. Angels threw a party. Shepherds came. Wise men, basically kings and wealthy men from afar, traveled hundreds of miles to come and celebrate his first birthday, right? That's what's going on. So they're thinking, that is what we're going back to. That is what the angel has come to invite us to come back to. So, verse 22, we're going to continue. It starts with this word, but. How many of you guys know that whenever a sentence starts with but, it means basically disregard everything that I just said, right? But, that's a big but, right? And not the kind that Sir Mix-a-Lot sings about. This is not a good big but. This is a bad big but, okay? So, when he says but, this is a big, big but here, okay? So, but when he heard, that wasn't that funny, you should stop. No, sorry about that. But when he heard that Archelaus, Herod Archelaus was his name, when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in the place of his father Herod. So Herod died, but the throne's not empty. No one was inviting him to come to the palace because someone else is already reigning in Herod's place. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. And so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So just by happenstance, it's saying, like the Old Testament prophesied that the Messiah would be a Nazarene, but it also prophesied that he would rise from the land of Egypt. And it also prophesied that he'd be born in Bethlehem, and you would think those three things are all contradictory. Yet amazingly, through God's providence, all three of those things were all true in this story. And so that's what it's pointing out to us, is that prophecy. But he had to go to the land of Galilee. And so we have to understand, guys, it was Joseph and Mary's intention to raise Jesus in Judea. I think there's a map that's somewhere up there. So remember this map from a few weeks ago? We got it back, right? I got the map. Anyway, that's from Dora. And so anyway, here's Judea. Here's where they thought they were going back to. Can everybody over there see that? Am I on your... Anyway, you see the big thing that says Judea. Here, I'll do it for you guys too, because this reaches really far. Judea. That's where they thought they were going back to. Now, Judea, why is Judea important? Anybody know? What city does it contain? Jerusalem, right? I can't find it right here without... There we go, Jerusalem, right here in the middle. So Jerusalem is the capital. That, if you were going to be a somebody, that's where you needed to be from. And so when they're returning, their intention, the Bible tells us, was to return to Judea. This is where they were headed. They were going to live here because they were promised their son was going to be what? King. So if you got a kid and you're convinced your kid is going to be king, you need to live in Judea and probably, hopefully, in Jerusalem itself. But if not in Jerusalem itself, somewhere close by, because that is where all the important people live, right? Anybody influential, anybody with power, anybody that's going to be a somebody is going to be from Judea. That's like the cultural center of Israel. That is the religious center of Israel. And it's also the political power center of Israel. So if you're going to matter, you need to be from there, right? In fact, if you weren't from there, you were viewed as less faithful even to the Jewish religion like that. And so to really be somebody, you needed to be from Judea and really specifically Jerusalem. And so that's what happens. So Jesus, the problem is they realize even though he wants to live here, Herod the Great is dead. His son Archelaus is probably worse than Herod the Great was. And so Archelaus, as his first act of king of that region, you know what he did? He ordered the execution of every one of the nobles, one of the tribal leaders, the powerful people that all lived here. 3,000 people killed in one order, right? And so honestly, Joseph was right to be afraid. But again, you got to feel this inner turmoil. If you think your kid is going to be king, this is where you need to raise him. This is where he needs to be if he's ever going to have a chance. But Jesus would never be safe growing up in Judea. And so still with the map, so it says he withdrew, which means he kind of took to a secondary path, a secondary course. He withdrew to this place way up here called Galilee. All right? So from all the way down here, now he's all the way up here. And the thing about Galilee is that it's not just far away, but it's right here next to the sea, and there's a major road that runs inland into the rest of the inner corridor there. And so Galilee was actually a very kind of metropolitan place. It wasn't a very Jewish place. There were Jews that lived there, right, because it was Jewish territory. But now that the Roman Empire was in charge, this was a major trade route. So there would have been people from every nation on earth coming and going through Galilee. All right? And so now to us today, that sounds like a great thing. Oh, well, there's probably lots of educational opportunities. There's probably lots of business opportunities, and all of that would be true. But remember, the Jews were very big on being purists, right? And so to be in a place where there's tons of people from every tribe and nation would not have been seen as a good thing for a faithful Jew. Faithful Jew thought outsiders had cooties, okay? And so if you're from Galilee, you definitely have Jewish cooties, okay? And so they thought these people up there are no good. They're around foreigners. They're not faithful. They're not like us. They're not pure. They're not, you fill in all the blanks. They're not good enough, right? And so to raise your kid there and think he's going to have a chance at being king, that's like denominations going to like Vegas to farm out pastors, right? Like, oh, we're going to raise all of our pastors in Vegas and then send them all over the country, right? We don't think that way. And no Jew would think, oh, you know what, we're going to go find our king in Galilee. In fact, years later, when Jesus began his ministry, someone said, hey, listen, I think we found the Messiah. And he goes, oh, great, where's he from? And the person said, oh, he's from Galilee. And the person said, can anything good come from there? Right? And so that statement just demonstrates exactly what was in the minds of the Jewish people. And that's exactly what Mary and Joseph would have been struggling with as they raised their son there, because they know the promise is that he's going to be king. And they feel just like everyone else. Nothing good can come from here. But we got to get as far away from here as we can get and still be in Israel. So this is as far away as we can get. Right? And so that's what they're living with. That's the tension that they have in their mind. They know nothing good can come from there. And they know that Jesus has this promise on his life. Right? And in fact, Joseph, we know, worked as a carpenter. We don't know this for sure, but I imagine that Mary and Joseph probably tried to hold Jesus off from joining the family business as long as they possibly could. Because in their minds, like, we don't want him to do normal work. He's not supposed to be a normal man. He is supposed to be king. And so kind of get yourself in the place of them. Their actual physical location in life felt like it was making God's promise for Jesus' life impossible to achieve. How many of you guys have ever been there? There's something in your life and you go, man, from here, I don't know how this ever happens. From here, I don't know how this marriage is ever going to improve. From here, I don't know how I'm ever going to make it financially. From here, with these circumstances, with this stacked against me, I don't know how I'm going to make it mentally. Maybe you're really sick. From here, with these circumstances, I don't know how I'm going to make it physically. From here, I just don't know how it's possible. And that's what they felt every day when they looked at their son. Every year that Jesus spent in Galilee, Mary and Joseph felt like bigger and bigger failures as parents. And I'm sure they prayed constantly for God to bring the promise to pass. They prayed, how long, God? How long until it begins to happen? When will it happen? How will it happen? You see, their hopes were not just for Jesus' sake. I mean, they wanted Jesus to live this incredible life that God had promised for him. But they also wanted Jesus to usher in an age of freedom and blessing for Israel again. If Jesus was going to be the great king, then he was the key for life returning to something decent in Israel as a whole. So it wasn't even just for them or for their son, for all of their neighbors, for everyone they knew. They thought this king that we're raising is going to be what fixes everything in our country. You see, guys, they remembered the promise of the angel. He will be great. He'll save his people, and he'll sit on the throne of his ancestor, David. But as the years ticked by, I can only imagine how Mary and Joseph must have felt. I really thought things would be different. I really thought this kid was meant for greatness. As Jesus is swinging a hammer and building chairs and tables as a carpenter. They would have thought, what was it all for anyway? Why were we hiding in Egypt? If he was just going to be a carpenter. And you see, it was 20 or 30 years that Mary and Joseph waited for any sign that God's promise would come true. And then at age 30, Jesus began to travel. And he began to gain attention. But here's the crazy thing. Even as it began to come true, it didn't look anything like what they thought it would. And so now they have a whole other problem. And so I want to talk about this for a few minutes. The first point I want to make, guys, is simple. God's people have always struggled with God's timeline. And so some of you are here today and you look at things in your life and you really thought it would be different. You really thought God would this or not that or yes this or take me here. And you can relate to that. I want you to understand that you're in good company. God's people have always struggled with God's timeline. We're going to go way back to the book of Habakkuk. This is an Old Testament prophet who lived hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus. And I want you to hear what he says. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you don't save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Tell us how you feel, Habakkuk. I mean, don't hold back, right? I mean, look at the mouth on this guy. This isn't God talking. This is someone talking to God. Get your head around that for a second, right? This is someone talking to God, and he says, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you don't listen? God, what are you, sleeping up there? What's going on? I notice the problems. How come you can't see them? This guy's pretty bold, right? He's frustrated. And the funny thing is, though, is that those words that Habakkuk's saying, I want you to know they could have just as easily been Mary and Joseph's words, right? As they're sitting there in Galilee, how long, God? How long will we have to sit here with this kid who's supposed to be king as all this nonsense goes on? How long? God, I thought you told us that his name would be great. He would save his people. How long until you do something? God, how long? We heard the angels sing those songs. The wise men came. And yet years later, here we still are in Galilee. And it's beginning to feel like none of that ever happened. You see, the words of Habakkuk could just as easily come from our lips today, couldn't they? How long, God, do I have to put up with this person? Right? We're talking about your boss, not your spouse, right? No. How long, God, do I have to put up with this person? How long until you save my kids? God, how long until this person that I love finally gets clean from this addiction and their lives begin to go somewhere? How long, God, will I deal with this pain and with these health problems? How long will I feel this loneliness? Or how long will this sin keep plaguing me? How long will I keep falling back into this same mess over and over and over? I thought it would look different than this. And it doesn't even have to be like dramatically bad, because a lot of times life is okay, but have you ever felt like, God, I know your plan has got to be more than just okay. Jesus, I think you died for more than okay. I think God left heaven and became a man and walked earth and gave his life and was resurrected for a little bit more than okay. You see, last week we said that Jesus is our high priest. He's our go-between, the one that kind of goes between us and God the Father. Right? And so he's been where we are, and he understands us. And so he's capable of helping us in our time of need. I'll read it again. Hebrews 4:15 and 16 says, "For we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with us in our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." So here's what I want you to know. When we feel like, how long, God? Where are you, God? I thought it would be different than this, God. When we feel like that, Jesus knows, according to that verse, Jesus knows what it is to feel what you feel. He knows what it is to long for a reality that's better than this one. And so you can approach him with those feelings with confidence. And it says that you'll receive mercy and you'll find grace. Because that's one of the hard parts of feeling this way, isn't it? Like you don't feel like you're supposed to feel that way. I can't be like Habakkuk and be like, how long, God? What you doing up there? But it's saying that we can approach him with those feelings. And what will we find? Not, what are you thinking talking to me like that? Right? He's saying, no, we can approach him with those feelings and we're going to receive mercy. And we're going to find grace. I'm going to move on to answer some of these bigger questions, though. Guys, God sometimes feels slow to us because we fail to see the scope of his plan. So we struggle with his timetable, and he feels slow because we don't see how big this thing is. I'm going to go back to Habakkuk's complaint because God actually answered his complaint without shooting him with a lightning bolt. So here's God's answer in Habakkuk 1:5. Look at the nations. So first of all, he's mad at the people in front of him, and God's saying, no. Your scope is too small. Back it up. And look at all the nations. So that's his first word. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. So God is basically telling Habakkuk, listen, you don't see anything because you have no clue how big this thing is. And if I explained it all to you, you wouldn't know what to do with the information. Okay? So that's essentially what God is telling him. Because he's mad at some people in front of him, some specific situations where some people are sinning. And he's saying, listen, I'm going to correct that, but I'm going to correct so much more than that. The answer that I'm bringing is like global size answer. And so I'm not going to respond to slap the hands of the 3 people you're mad at. I'm actually raising an empire right now called Babylon. And Babylon is going to sweep across your known world. And they're going to be my hand of judgment against sinners, not just in your hometown, not just in your nation, but on every nation that you know exists at this point. He's saying, listen, I'm answering you, but my answer is so much bigger than you can even get your head around, right? I'm bringing something historic and cataclysmic to bear on this situation. So here's what I want you to get, guys. God is not slow. He simply plans to do far more than you imagine. He's not slow. He's just starting way out here, and his answer is so much bigger than you even have your eyes on those situations at this point. So we usually don't even recognize the beginnings of it because it's happening way outside the scope of our observation. You see, Mary and Joseph's dream for what Jesus would be was just too small. And that's why they couldn't understand why it was taking so long. They only had dreams for a king of Israel, but God sent them the king of the world. They wanted redemption for Israel, but God was redeeming all of mankind. They wanted freedom from Rome, and God wanted your freedom from sin and death. They wanted a better life, and God wanted to give eternal life. You see, the answer was so much bigger than the problem that they were perceiving. So the next point is this. We want God to respond to symptoms, but God is more concerned with curing our disease. This is our fundamental problem. When you get frustrated, when you get confused, why God this, why God that, why not this, all of those, our fundamental issue is that we're zeroed in on symptoms, but God is interested in curing our disease. I want to give you guys a statement that's big, and then I'll kind of unpack it. Humans suffer because humans sin. Okay? So that explains why the world is broken, why your life is sometimes broken, why your circumstances are broken. Humans suffer because humans sin. Now, I want to give a disclaimer. Your suffering is not necessarily tied to your sin, okay? So if you're going through something hard, it's not necessarily because you've done something wrong and God is punishing you. But the presence of evil, disease, darkness, all the things that hurt us, the presence of that in the world is linked to a human sin as a whole. So on a macro level, on a big level, suffering exists in the world because of human sin. So, if humans suffer because humans sin, to fundamentally eliminate human suffering, God must eliminate human what? Sin. So sure, he could take this one situation away, but that does nothing to fix every other situation. Right? He could make this stop hurting here, but you know what's going to happen tomorrow is something else is going to hurt. Right? So to fundamentally eliminate human suffering, God must eliminate human sin. And so Mary and Joseph probably struggled so much, with all the years of waiting in Galilee, every social problem, every personal problem, every political problem they encountered. I'm sure they would hit the table and say, if Jesus were just king now, this wouldn't be happening. If Jesus were on the throne, I wouldn't be putting up with this. If Jesus were king, this wouldn't be our circumstances. But then imagine how they felt on top of it when Jesus' public ministry begins and he's not doing any of the things that it looks like he should be doing. In fact, he's making all of the powerful people in the land mad. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, all these people whose opinion mattered. Jesus was making them all angry. He should have been forming coalitions with the power brokers so he could start his ascent to the throne. But Jesus was doing and saying things that just didn't make sense for someone who wants to be the king in Israel. But here's the thing. Jesus had not come to treat the symptoms in Israel. He came to cure the fundamental human disease of sin. He didn't come to be king in Israel. He came to be king of the world. So eventually, all the problems in Israel would be solved in the redemption and the resurrection of the human race. And so Jesus didn't have to specifically solve Israel's problems because those would be included when he solved the problems of the whole world. And so that is what God was working on through Jesus, and that's why it took so long. Guys, I know that we struggle with why God is not making things better for us right now when we're hurting. And, we think, why didn't God fix this situation? I know that God healed that person when they had that disease. So this is worse. Why didn't God fix this situation? Why didn't God solve that problem for me? Why didn't God heal in these circumstances? Right? And that's hard. Those are hard questions. And I want you to understand is that sometimes God does intervene in our here and now problems and bring help. Sometimes he does. But we have to understand that on a fundamental level, Jesus came to address human sin and rebellion because that is the underlying cause of every other problem. He came to bring humanity back into right relationship with God so that we could once again exist in God's blessing and not under the curse. So in the eternal sense, that solution will make everything else right in the end. Whatever problems you face, when you come into right relationship with God the Father through Jesus, you now exist in his blessing. And even though you're going to have problems between now and the end, that puts you in the place you need to be. So in an eternal sense, every one of your problems is solved the moment that happens. That is the real solution. So in the final eternal sense, everything wrong in your life has already been made right in the resurrection. I'm going to read to you some verses that talk about that day. So this is the book of Revelation. John, before his death, was given a glimpse of the future, of the day when Jesus would return, judge the world, and everything would be made right. Sin and evil would be done away with, and forever we would live in a resurrected state. So here's John's description of what he saw in this vision. Revelation 21, 1-5 says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." So heaven itself is coming down to the earth, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. So he's painting it almost like a marriage, that heaven and earth are being reunited in a wedding ceremony almost. "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' And he who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.'" What I want to tell you guys is that what Jesus did was done specifically to pay for and provide that day. That is the goal of everything God has done in the world, is that day. That's what it's all been aimed at. That's the answer to every problem you'll ever face. That's the answer to every situation you struggle with now, is that day. And fundamentally, that is what God came to do through Jesus. And that's good news, right? But here's the cool thing, is that in the meantime, in the here and now, on top of that day, there are still going to be times where God can relieve your temporary problems without damaging his larger plan. Because you have to understand is that in Romans 8:28, it says that in all things God works to the good of those. So there's a lot of bad things that will happen in your life that then God will take them, seize them, and use them for good. And so he's got a larger plan that's in place too, to redeem the world. And sometimes he'll use your struggles, your suffering, and your pain to accomplish that. Right? And so there's a lot of things going on in your life that you don't like, that you're screaming out, "God, how long?" about. And he's saying, just be patient, son. Just be patient, daughter, because you're going to see in 5 years why I left this here. You're going to see in 10 years why I allowed you to walk through that. Right? So there's a lot of things in your life that he's going to redeem and use for good. So in the meantime, when he can help, and when you ask him for help and it doesn't interfere with that larger plan, then yeah, he'll still respond and he'll bring. And that's why sometimes you'll see someone has a minor thing and they pray and God intervenes and it's made better. And then you have a major thing and you pray and God does nothing. And you go, "God, I don't know if you realize this, but I'm better looking than they are. I'm a better Christian. I give more on Sundays than they do, and I serve in the nursery. Why did you heal them and not me?" Right? And that's a real question. Why does God respond in some situations and not others? And so, guys, we struggle because we can't see the scope of the big plan. Maybe we don't know that in 10 years this disease will actually be used by God to impact lives all around you. Maybe we don't know that this is actually a blessing in disguise, and it turns out to be, even though we're struggling now. Maybe we don't know that this financial struggle that you just seem to always deal with, even though it's not good for you, it's actually building a strength and a resourcefulness in your kids, and they're going to do things in their lives that'll blow you away because they watched you struggle. Maybe we don't see the countless people that our faithfulness through our hurt are actually inspiring and even pointing to Jesus. You see, we don't get to see the big picture and how the threads of our misfortune are woven into the fabric of the blessing of others. I'll say it again, guys. You don't get to see the big picture and see how the threads of your misfortune are woven into the fabric of the blessing of others. You see, what we read there in Revelation 21, that is the real and the core fundamental work of God. That is what this whole thing has always been about. And I know it feels great in the moment when you pray and God does something. And that's a bonus. But Revelation 21, 1-5, that's what this whole thing has really always been about. You see, while relief of symptoms is nice when it's possible, what we really need is a cure to the disease. That's what we really need. And that's what God with us primarily accomplishes. Why that baby was born 2,000 years ago, why he lived the life that he did, and why he died the way that he died and rose again. That's what it means that God was with us. That's what the Christmas story is really about. You see, guys, I guarantee that through those years in Galilee, Mary and Joseph constantly asked, "How long, God? How long? When will you make good on your promises?" And I want you to know that it took longer than they hoped. It didn't look anything like what they expected. And that's because God's solution is always far bigger than we ever would dream possible. Let's pray. Father, we're so grateful for the fact that your scope is so much bigger than ours. We would be satisfied with just these small little things. Like we would be satisfied with the relief of one or two symptoms while the disease rages on. But you're so much better than that. So God, I thank you for that. I thank you for the fact that you didn't just jump in and roll up your sleeves and fix one or two things and let everything else spin out of control. But your plan has always been the redemption of the entire human race. Your plan has been the redemption of the earth and of everything in it. You want to make all things new. So I give you thanks for the fact that what started with a tiny baby in a manger all those years ago ends with what we read in Revelation 21. It ends with you making all things new. God, I pray for all of us this Christmas season that you would help us to knit our hope to that day, to build our faith around that day and that paradigm. And God, to continue to seek you as our situations are hard and our circumstances produce struggle. Because you do in times, you still want to respond when it's possible there. But what you've really come to do is to undo all that's gone wrong in the world. And so we thank you for that. And we look to that day with hope. And we give you thanks in these next few days as we celebrate the appearance of your Son who made all of this possible. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, God bless you. Merry Christmas. We'll see you on Tuesday.